What if the quiet man in seat 12F, dressed in a worn jacket with nothing but a tattered backpack, wasn't just another tired passenger? What if he once flew missions so dangerous even his name was erased? And what if the moment he stood, an entire squadron of F-22s returned to formation? This is the story of a forgotten hero, a promise kept, and the day the sky remembered a man the world had tried to forget. If stories of quiet courage, redemption, and honor speak to your heart, you're in the right place. Take a moment to like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more inspiring tales that uplift and stay with you long after the screen fades to black. Now, let's begin the story of Viper 1. The boarding gate buzzed with the usual chatter: businessmen on calls, tourists juggling luggage, flight attendants smiling too wide. Amid the noise, no one noticed the man walking alone. Michael Lane moved with the quiet grace of someone used to slipping through life unnoticed. His shoulders were broad but not imposing. His steps calm but certain. Long chestnut hair brushed the collar of his faded green jacket, military issue but aged. The kind of garment someone kept, not out of pride, but memory. Slung over one shoulder was an old canvas backpack, scuffed and stitched in places where time had worn it thin. Most would have called it junk. But nestled into the corner flap, barely visible, was a small black patch, a coiled snake with piercing white eyes. No one saw it except the flight attendant checking tickets. "Welcome aboard, Mr. Lane," she said, glancing down at her tablet. "You're seat 27C, aisle." Before Michael could nod, a beep sounded in her earpiece. She tapped it, listened, then looked back at him. "Oh, sir, there's been a change. Maintenance found a fault in the rear seat sensors. We'll need to move you up to 12F. Michael blinked once. First class. Technically, she smiled apologetically. More like upgraded solitude. He nodded once and continued on, unaware that seat 12F was about to become the most watched seat on the flight. The first-class cabin was already filling. Sleek leather seats, ambient lighting, and the subtle aroma of citrus cleaner gave the illusion of luxury. But not all passengers were pleased by the last-minute addition. Logan Carter, a sharply dressed man in his 40s, with a designer watch and a Bluetooth headset, glanced sideways as Michael stepped into the aisle. "Excuse me," Michael said, calmly. Logan didn't budge. Flight crew," he called out, half joking, half serious. "I think someone wandered into the wrong cabin." A few chuckles stirred from surrounding seats. Michael gave a polite nod and slid into 12F, placing his backpack under the seat in front. He said nothing. In the adjacent seat, 12E, a young woman in uniform stiffened. Her fatigues were neatly pressed, her brown hair tied into a regulation bun, her boots immaculate. She glanced at Michael once, then, twice, her eyes narrowing slightly at the sight of his worn-down clothes and unshaven jawline. "You Air Force?" she asked. Finally, more test than curiosity. Michael turned to her, expression unreadable. "Used to be. Used to be," she repeated. "What did you fly, Cessnas at the academy?" Michael's voice was steady. "I flew with people better than me." She scoffed under her breath and returned to scrolling through her phone. Across the aisle, Ava Monroe, a junior flight attendant just 2 weeks into the job, watched the exchange from the jump seat discreetly. Something about the man had caught her eye, not in appearance, but in presence. There was a stillness to him, like an old oak that had seen fire and storm yet stood. She noticed the patch on his back, the black snake coiled like a silent guardian. Strange symbol, she whispered to herself. She didn't recognize it, but something told her she should. The plane took off smoothly. Cabin lights dimmed. Meal carts rolled. Conversations hushed. Logan took another call, speaking loud enough for the front half of the cabin to hear about quarterly projections and hostile takeovers. Meanwhile, Michael sat quietly, hands clasped, looking out the window at nothing but clouds. In his jacket pocket, folded and refolded, was a crumpled drawing, a stick figure girl, with long hair, holding hands with a taller figure, wearing a pilot's helmet. Above them, written in careful child script, "Welcome home, Daddy. Love, Amelia." He closed his eyes. The memory of her laugh echoed in his mind, the way her arms wrapped around his neck when he left last time. The promise he'd made not to the country, not to any mission, but to her. "I'll be there by Tuesday," he had whispered. No more missed birthdays. An hour into the flight, a soft cry drew attention. An elderly woman had dropped her blanket and cane. Most passengers ignored it. Logan looked annoyed. Michael stood without hesitation, bent down, picked up the cane, refolded the blanket, and gently draped it over her shoulders. "Thank you, young man," she said, eyes kind. He gave her a respectful nod and returned to his seat. Lena in 12E glanced sideways. "You always play the hero," Michael looked at her. "No," he said. "I just remember what it's like to be invisible." She said nothing after that. Just before the cabin lights dimmed further, Ava approached, quietly crouching by Michael's seat. "Sir," she said gently, "that patch on your bag, mind if I ask what it means?" Michael looked down at the coiled snake, then back at her. "I used to be the one they called when no one else came back," he said softly. "But that was a long time ago." Ava studied his face, searching for something. A lie. A hint of pride. All she saw was weariness, the kind that doesn't come from age but from carrying the weight of memory. She nodded respectfully, whispered, "Thank you for your service," and walked away. Behind them, Logan sneered to Lena. "These vets love the attention. Bet he's never seen a real mission in his life." Lena didn't respond. For the first time, she wasn't sure. Michael's eyes remained fixed on the clouds. Somewhere beneath them, his daughter was waiting. And somewhere above, destiny was circling closer than anyone realized. The hum of the engines was steady, a gentle thrum beneath the tension that now simmered in the first-class cabin. Michael Lane sat silently in Seat 12F, his weathered backpack tucked under the seat, his hands resting loosely on his lap. He hadn't moved much since takeoff. He didn't recline his seat. He didn't sip from the complimentary drink tray. And he certainly didn't make small talk. But others noticed him, especially Logan Carter. Logan adjusted his cufflinks with exaggerated flair, making sure the light caught the platinum. He turned toward the woman in uniform beside Michael, the one who had been casting sideways glances. "So," Logan said casually. "You're Army, right? Air Force," she replied, keeping her tone clipped. "Lieutenant Lena Hayes." "Ah, impressive," he said, offering a smirk. "So what's your take on our new cabin addition?" Lena raised a brow. "Excuse me." Logan nodded toward Michael. "Mr. Military Surplus over here." Lena gave a quick glance toward Michael, then looked back at Logan. "Not my place to judge." "Of course not." Logan said, his voice dropping just enough to be overheard. "But you gotta admit he doesn't exactly scream decorated hero. More like old mechanic from some airbase who snuck into the wrong section." Michael didn't turn his head. He simply exhaled softly through his nose. Logan leaned closer, raising his voice just enough to cross the boundary of decency. Maybe he flew one of those kiddie simulators at an air show. Bet he tells people he served while changing tires. That was when the boy spoke up. A small voice about 4 rows behind chimed in. He has a snake tag. Heads turned. A few passengers looked toward the voice's source, a young boy maybe 7 or 8, peeking through the gap between the seats. His eyes were wide, curious. "It says, Viper 1, the boy added. "I saw it when he walked past." Michael shifted slightly but said nothing. Lena furrowed her brows. Viper. One Logan chuckled. Sounds like a comic book character. But Lena wasn't laughing. She turned to Michael, now truly looking at him. Not his clothes, not his silence, but his bearing, his posture, the way he carried stillness like armor. She cleared her throat. Sir, pardon me for asking, but Viper 1. That's a call sign, isn't it? Michael turned to her slowly. His eyes were clear, almost calm, but there was something beneath, something buried. It was, he said simply. Before she could ask more, the flight attendants began their service rounds. Ava Monroe approached with a tray, her movements careful, her expression thoughtful. As she handed Logan a ginger ale, he asked loudly, "Hey, Ava, ever heard of Viper 1? She hesitated. "No, sir." Logan grinned smugly. "Didn't think so. Sounds like a rejected name for an energy drink." Michael didn't react, but Ava noticed something. His left hand had slowly curled into a loose fist. 15 minutes later, turbulence rippled through the fuselage. Just a slight shake, but it sent one of Logan's many devices clattering to the aisle. A silver tablet skidded toward the cabin divider. Logan rolled his eyes. Unbelievable. He made no effort to retrieve it. Michael unbuckled his seatbelt, and without a word stepped into the aisle, picked up the tablet, and returned it. Logan smirked. "Thanks, champ." But Michael didn't hand it to him. Instead, he placed it gently on Logan's tray table, then turned back to his seat. The silence lingered awkwardly. Lena leaned toward Michael, her voice quieter now. "You flew combat, didn't you?" Michael didn't answer immediately. When he did, it was almost inaudible. "Once or twice." She nodded slowly. "You don't talk like most vets I meet." "I'm not most vets." Ava passed by again, refilling drinks. As she leaned over, her eyes caught the corner of Michael's patch again. Something about it continued to nag at her. Not the snake itself, but the design. It was old. Obsolete. No one used that kind of unit insignia anymore. She went back to the galley and did something she wasn't supposed to. She Googled it. Nothing. No record. No matches. She typed again. Viper 1 Air Force. Still nothing. "Strange," she murmured. Back in 12E, Lena sat straighter in her seat. "You know," she said. "Trying again, if that's your call sign, someone's bound to recognize it." Michael turned his gaze to the clouds outside. "That's not why I kept it." Then, why he paused. "Because my daughter drew it when I came home from my last mission. She said I looked like a snake that never blinked." Lena blinked herself, unsure how to respond. Michael continued his voice, like gravel smoothed by years. "She was 5, said it made me look cool. So I kept it." For the first time, Lena smiled. "That's kinda sweet." Michael gave a tiny nod. "She's 8 now, waiting for me in D.C. 3 rows back, the boy who had noticed the patch earlier leaned over to his mother. "Mom, do you think he's really Viper?" 1. His mother hushed him. "Sweetheart, don't bother the man. But what if he's famous?" The mother softened her voice. "Then he's probably tired of being asked about it." Back in first class, Logan watched Michael out of the corner of his eye. His curiosity now blended with irritation. The man wasn't biting, wasn't defending himself, wasn't trying to impress anyone. That more than anything annoyed Logan, because it meant there might be something real about him. The captain's voice crackled over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're making an unscheduled stop for refueling and technical check-in at Andrews Air Force Base. This will be brief. Please remain seated." The cabin buzzed with questions. Logan huffed. "Military base." "What are we, a cargo drop?" Lena, however, turned to Michael slowly. "Andrews," she said. Michael didn't answer, but his jaw tightened slightly. Outside the window, wisps of white clouds glided across a cobalt sky, the calm above masking the stirrings within. Michael Lane remained still in seat 12F, a portrait of quiet endurance. He hadn't spoken in over an hour, not since the young boy pointed out the faded Viper 1 patch on his bag, and not since Logan Carter had mockingly dismissed him in front of the entire first-class cabin. To anyone watching, he might have seemed indifferent, detached. But inside, a memory stirred. Not a grand battlefield, not medals, not explosions or parades. Just the sound of a child's breath asleep in the back seat of a dusty truck as they crossed 3 states to start over. That was the weight Michael carried in his silence. Not shame, not pride. Love. In seat 12E, Lieutenant Lena Hayes found herself unusually unsettled. Her earlier skepticism toward Michael had cracked, and she now found herself observing him not to judge, but to understand. The man had barely touched the offered drink. He declined the meal tray politely. And yet when the elderly woman in row 2 fumbled her headset cord and sent her reading glasses to the floor, Michael was already on his feet again, retrieving them before even the crew reacted. The woman thanked him. Others didn't. No applause. No nods. No recognition. Michael simply returned to his seat and stared out at the sky again. Lena leaned back. "Who are you?" she murmured under her breath. In the rear galley, Ava Monroe stood by the service counter, staring at the digital panel of seat assignments, but her thoughts were elsewhere. She had searched 5 different military archive sites. Nothing on Viper 1. Not a unit. Not a call sign. Not a legacy program. It was like he didn't exist. And yet, he did. In that stillness, in the way the air shifted when he stood. She remembered something her grandfather, also Air Force, once said: "The deadliest men are the ones who never raise their voice." Ava glanced up the aisle toward 12F. He hadn't raised his voice once. Logan, meanwhile, was busy emailing someone loud enough for others to overhear. "No, I'm telling you, we've got some cosplay vet up here in first. Makes the whole airline look bad. I might write about it." Unvetted veterans in VIP, the decline of airline standards. Lena turned to him. "You always this loud, or just when you're insecure?" Logan blinked. "Excuse me?" She shrugged. "You've spent 2 hours mocking a man who hasn't said 10 words to you. Either you're intimidated, or desperate to be noticed." A hush fell between them. Even Ava, walking past, raised a brow in silent approval. Logan shifted uncomfortably and looked out the window. A few seats behind, the same boy from earlier tugged at his mother's sleeve again. "Mom," he whispered. "Why won't anyone talk to the soldier man?" His mother sighed softly. "Sometimes, sweetie, people are quiet because they've seen things they can't explain. Like aliens." She smiled. "No. Like war. Or grief. Or love." The boy turned his gaze to Michael again, this time with reverence. Michael didn't notice the boy. He was watching the ground now. The plane had started its gradual descent toward Andrews Air Force Base. From this height, the rows of hangars, runways, and jet-line shadows looked like a forgotten chessboard, waiting for its next move. He'd landed there once, years ago, but not as a passenger, not wearing civilian boots, and certainly not to be greeted by a name he'd left behind. He closed his eyes briefly. A name was just a sound, but the people who whispered it, they were the ghosts that stayed. The intercom crackled again. "Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be making a brief ground stop at Andrews Air Force Base for refueling and inspection. Please remain seated. This will only take 20 minutes. Michael opened his eyes. He reached slowly into the outer pocket of his backpack and removed a small, worn leather wallet. Inside was a folded photograph creased a dozen times. A little girl, dark hair, missing front tooth, holding up a cardboard sign. "We love you, Viper 1. Come home." He folded it back and placed it over his heart. Lena noticed. Her voice was soft this time. Is that your daughter? Michael nodded. She waiting in D.C. She's always waiting, he replied. I try to be worth the wait. Lena hesitated. You don't owe an explanation to anyone. But for what it's worth, I think you carry something most of us aren't ready to understand. Michael turned to her, his voice calm and deep. It's not about what I carry. It's what I choose to put down. She didn't ask more. For the first time since boarding, the silence between them felt companionable. Just before landing, Ava approached one last time. Her tray was empty. No reason to be there except instinct. She leaned in and whispered, I don't know who you are, sir. But whatever they say when we land, I just want you to know thank you. Michael looked up. His reply was simple. I'm just a man trying to keep a promise. Ava gave a small nod and moved on. The wheels touched down smoothly at Andrews. As the plane taxied along the runway, several passengers turned to the windows, surprised by the sight rows of parked F-22 Raptors in formation. Uniformed crew, moving in precise rhythm. Logan leaned toward the window. Must be some kind of demonstration. But Lena saw something else. 2 military SUVs were approaching the plane from the side, and one of them bore a flag. Her heartbeat quickened. No one else seemed to notice, except Michael. He straightened slightly, shoulders square, hands still, eyes forward. There was no panic, no confusion, only readiness. Inside the cockpit, the captain's voice came over a private channel to the crew. We're being asked to open cabin access. We have a special clearance code from the base commander. 3 personnel will board briefly. Ava's supervisor looked puzzled. Did we have VIP clearance on Manifest? No. That's what's strange. Back in the cabin, Lena's eyes darted between Michael and the approaching vehicles. She whispered more to herself than anyone. They're not here for a safety inspection, are they? Michael said nothing, but for the first time, he smiled. The landing at Andrews had been smooth, almost unremarkable, but the atmosphere inside the cabin had shifted. As the aircraft taxied toward the refueling zone, the passengers murmured with curiosity. Most were unaware of the base's significance. To them, it was simply an unexpected pause in an otherwise ordinary flight. But for those who had once worn a uniform, or still did, it meant something else. It meant proximity to power, and protocol, and sometimes, memory. Michael Lane didn't move. He didn't have to. Outside the window of seat 12F, the rows of hangars stood like silent sentinels, flanked by olive-drab service trucks and rigid formations of ground crew. The sun had dipped slightly lower, casting a honeyed glow across the tarmac. It was a familiar light to Michael, the kind of light you remember after your final sortie. Not because it was beautiful, but because you didn't think you'd see it again. Lena Hayes sat upright now, every muscle alert. Her officer's training kicked in, eyes scanning for movement, for insignia, for signal. Then she saw them. 2 black military SUVs approached from the far hangar, their tires whispering against the concrete. The front vehicle bore a small U.S. flag on its antenna. The rear held a passenger whose silhouette, even from this distance, sat with the erect posture of command. The lead vehicle stopped precisely 20 feet from the plane's boarding ramp. 3 figures stepped out. 2 wore flight suits with F-22 Raptor patches on the sleeve. The 3rd wore something different, a tailored jacket with silver insignia at the collar markings, not usually seen on pilots, but on leaders. Very few leaders. Ava Monroe, standing quietly in the front galley, stared through the small porthole window of the service door. She inhaled sharply. "They're sending officers," she whispered. Her supervisor frowned. No one from command boards a commercial flight mid-refuel. The intercom clicked on again this time, in a clipped, controlled voice from the flight deck. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are temporarily opening the forward cabin door for authorized base personnel. Please remain seated." A click. Silence. Then the door opened. Time slowed as the first boot stepped onto the top stair. Captain Marcus Reeves was not yet 40, but his face bore the weathering of a man who'd spent more time in the sky than on land. He was flanked by 2 fellow pilots, both junior, both visibly tense. Their eyes scanned the cabin from the moment they crossed the threshold. Then Marcus saw him. It took less than a second. In a sea of passengers, first-class decorum, and indifferent travelers, his eyes locked on seat 12F. His entire body stopped mid-step. He exhaled once slow, controlled like a man stepping into a memory he wasn't sure was real. "Sir," his voice cracked barely above a whisper. "Is that really you?" Passengers turned. Ava froze. Lena sat motionless, breath caught. Logan looked up from his tablet halfway through an email he would never finish. Michael Lane stood. It was not dramatic. It was not rushed. It was precise. Deliberate. He rose like a soldier who never forgot how. He squared his shoulders. He didn't smile. He saluted. Not casual. Not polite. It was textbook military. A salute that cut through the room like thunder. Captain Reeves returned the gesture immediately, snapping to attention. Then, with reverence in his voice, he turned to the pilots flanking him and said the words that would unravel everything. "Gentlemen, this is Viper 1. The air was vacuum tight. You could hear the engines humming, the buzz of a phone screen dimming, the creak of a leather seat adjusting. But no one spoke. Viper 1, passengers blinked, unsure what they'd heard. Lena stood now. She didn't mean to, it just happened. Her heart pounded in her chest. Michael, no Viper 1, lowered his hand and spoke his first words to the room. "At ease, Captain." Marcus stepped forward. "Sir, we thought I know what they thought," Michael said calmly. "I let them think it." Marcus's jaw clenched. "Sir, I owe you. You owe me nothing." Michael cut in gently. "You made it back. That's all that ever mattered." The younger pilot on Marcus's left finally spoke, voice trembling slightly. "Sir, are you really Viper 1? The Viper 1? Michael turned, not with arrogance, but quiet certainty. "I used to be." Lena couldn't process fast enough. Viper 1. The name was never in the registry. No official call sign history. No training records. But stories. Yes. Whispered rumors among certain units. A shadow pilot. A ghost call sign. The one who flew into airspace so hostile even drones refused to enter. The one who guided wounded squadrons out when GPS went dark. The one who never returned for debriefs because he never left a trail. And now he stood here in a faded green jacket on a commercial flight. In seat 12F. Logan Carter looked pale now. He opened his mouth, then shut it again. Then looked away. Ava's eyes shimmered with sudden emotion. This wasn't just a passenger anymore. This was something bigger. Something sacred. Marcus stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Sir, the Raptors are aligned on runway 3. They asked if we should stand by for escort." Michael hesitated, then gave a single nod. "Tell them Eagle flight hold formation." Marcus pressed his earpiece. "Copy that." A beat. Then he looked back up at Michael and said quietly, "The base commander asked me to tell you. The skies are yours again." Michael nodded once. "I never needed them to be mine," he said. "Just needed them to stay safe." With that, he turned and sat down. Not as a man in hiding, but as Viper 1 reclaiming his silence. Outside, 2 F-22 Raptors began to taxi from the hangar. Wingtips gleamed in the low sun. Engines hummed like thunder on a leash. Inside the cabin, no one knew what was coming. But every heart began to race. Because sometimes, on an ordinary flight, with an ordinary delay, history walks up the stairs and salutes you. And nothing is ordinary again. The cabin door hadn't even fully closed behind Captain Marcus Reeves when the silence began to unravel. Passengers whispered, Heads turned. Murmurs rippled like wind across a wheat field. Viper 1. The name hovered in the air like static electricity, heavy charged and deeply unfamiliar to most, but unmistakably powerful to those who did recognize it. Michael Lane, until now, just a tired man in seat 12F with long hair and a weathered jacket, had stood tall and saluted in a way no civilian ever would. That gesture alone had shattered every assumption, every quiet insult, every dismissive glance. But it wasn't over. Not yet. Lena Hayes hadn't sat down. She stood motionless beside her seat, her posture instinctively upright, her breath shallow. She had seen war. She had trained with legends. But she had never seen a room go quiet like this, not in the field, not in the mess, not in a briefing. Something unspoken had shifted. This wasn't rank. This was reverence. Viper 1, she whispered, as if saying it too loud might fracture the moment. From the galley, Ava Monroe peeked out again, unsure if she should even be witnessing this. Her hands trembled, not from fear, but from awe. In her short time flying, she'd encountered the rude, the rich, the fragile, the arrogant, but never this. She watched Michael's shoulders relaxed, humble, yet undeniably resolute. And she understood what her grandfather once meant when he said real soldiers don't return. They remain. And then footsteps echoed on the tarmac. Another officer approached the aircraft, not in a flight suit, not like Reeves. This man wore a dark blue dress uniform with stars on his collar, 4 of them. The cabin gasped in hushed recognition. Lena's jaw dropped. Ava turned completely still. Even Logan, who had slouched with practiced indifference, sat up, though whether from guilt or instinct no one could say. The pilot inside the cockpit peeked out toward the cabin, muttering into his headset. Base commander just boarded. That's a 4-star. The cabin door opened again, and General Mason Carr stepped into the light. Carr had the presence of a mountain, broad, dignified, forged from decades of decision and consequence. His eyes scanned the room, not with curiosity, but with the clarity of a man who already knew exactly what he came for. He didn't need to look for Michael. He felt him. As he stepped forward, the cabin felt smaller, tighter, less like an airplane, and more like a courtroom about to hear testimony. Michael rose again. No hesitation. No flourish. Just a man standing. Carr paused 3 feet in front of him. The general's lips pressed into a thin line as he saluted first. Sir Carr said with full voice, on behalf of every pilot still flying, "Because of you, welcome back." Michael hesitated only slightly before returning the salute. "General Carr," he said calmly, "I didn't expect a welcoming committee." The general smiled faintly. "Neither did we. You were listed MIA, but some of us, we never stopped wondering." There was no applause, no fanfare, but the silence now carried weight, like the hush before a storm or the pause before a prayer. Carr turned toward the passengers. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, "I apologize for interrupting your journey, but some men don't belong in obscurity. Some men belong in the pages of history, even when they refuse to write them." He turned back to Michael. "You saved my son, Carr," said, voice thickening. "You guided his squadron through hell and disappeared before we could thank you. Today, after a decade, we get to say the words." Michael didn't speak, but his eyes closed briefly. And when they opened, they were glistening. From the back of the cabin, the small boy who had first spotted the patch tugged at his mother's sleeve again. "Mom, is he a superhero?" She smiled softly. "No, sweetheart. He's something rarer." Carr gestured toward the cabin crew. "Clear row 12. Before Ava could even react, passengers stood and shifted. Logan flustered and red-faced stood awkwardly and stepped aside, his head lowered not from command, but from shame. Lena stepped out of the way, her eyes never leaving Michael. Ava approached slowly. "Sir, is there anything you need?" Michael looked at her kindly. "Just my bag." She reached down for the battered canvas pack and handed it to him with both hands, like a sacred relic. "You left the world quietly," she whispered. "But it remembered you anyway." As Michael stepped into the aisle, passengers on both sides did something that stunned even the flight crew. They stood, row by row, section by section. No applause, no shouting, just quiet respect. A moving corridor of reverence for a man who had never once asked to be known. Michael passed through the aisle like a ghost returning to form, nodding once to Lena, who saluted quietly. "Thank you," she said, voice barely audible. He gave the faintest of smiles. "See you in the skies, Lieutenant." As he reached the cabin door, General Carr stepped aside. "You're still cleared for active airspace," he said with meaning. "Should you ever wish to return." Michael paused. "I already have," he said softly. "I'm going home." Then, as he descended the stairs into the golden afternoon light, two Raptors across the runway revved their engines. A formation maneuver, not standard, not scheduled, but symbolic. Two F-22s lifted off in parallel, one slightly behind, in what every military aviator would recognize as the missing man formation. Michael stopped at the bottom of the stairs. He looked skyward, and for a moment, the long hair, the worn jacket, the quiet demeanor all fell away, and Viper 1 stood tall again. The air inside the cabin didn't return to normal after Michael Lane descended the stairs. In fact, it didn't return at all. It remained suspended, as if the space where he'd stood still carried his weight. As if Seat 12F now bore the outline of something sacred. Passengers didn't sit immediately. Some remained standing in silent respect. Others stole glances toward the windows, hoping to catch one more glimpse of the man they had mocked, ignored, or misunderstood just an hour ago. In Seat 12E, Lieutenant Lena Hayes finally exhaled. She slowly lowered herself back down, placing both hands on her knees to steady herself. But inside, her heart still beat with the thunder of awe. "Viper 1, she whispered, as if saying it aloud would help make it real. Across the aisle, Logan Carter slumped into his leather seat. He rubbed his eyes not from fatigue, but from shame. He didn't want to look around. He didn't want to meet anyone's gaze, especially not Ava's. She was walking down the aisle now, her expression unreadable. But something in her shoulders had changed, straighter, more grounded. She wasn't just a junior flight attendant anymore. She had seen something, and it had changed her. She stopped by Logan's seat, not with malice, but with quiet certainty. "You might want to delete that email draft," she said softly. Logan looked up, startled. "I wasn't going to send it," he murmured. Ava tilted her head. "Good. Then maybe you won't have to carry that regret forever." She walked on, leaving Logan staring at the seat where Michael had sat. Out on the tarmac, the air shimmered with jet exhaust. Michael stood beside General Carr and Captain Reeves, watching as the F-22s banked through the sky, completing their silent tribute. His canvas bag was slung over one shoulder again, but this time it didn't seem like a burden. It looked like a flag. Carr turned to him. "Some of these men trained on your ghost stories," he said. "They used to joke Viper 1 was a myth, like Bigfoot with a call sign." Michael smiled faintly. "Let them keep the myth. The truth was, never mind to begin with." "You really don't want it back?" Carr asked. The recognition Michael looked back at the aircraft where passengers still craned their necks to watch. "No," he said. "But I want them to remember what matters." And what's that? Michael turned toward the terminal in the distance, where a child's silhouette stood, dark hair tied with a ribbon, hands pressed to the glass. "Promises," he said. "And who we make them for." Inside the plane, the cockpit phone rang. The captain picked up, listened, then opened the cabin door and stepped out into the aisle. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, clearing his throat, "the commander has informed us we are being granted a ceremonial escort for the remainder of our flight to Washington, D.C. Gasps rippled through the cabin. 2 F-22s will fly formation with us for the final leg. For safety reasons, we ask that all passengers remain seated with your seatbelts fastened and window shades open if you wish to witness this very special honor." He paused, then added with a smile that wasn't part of the script, "We thank you for flying with us and for flying with a legend." He returned to the cockpit. The door closed. The buzz didn't. Lena turned toward Ava, who stood beside her seat now. "You okay?" the lieutenant asked. Ava nodded slowly. "I think so." Lena looked down at the empty seat next to her. "I trained with colonels. I studied under aces. But that man," she trailed off. "He didn't just survive. He carried survival like a responsibility." Ava sat down on the armrest beside her, momentarily abandoning her crew duties. You could tell, Ava said, by the way he helped the old woman, the boy's tablet, even Logan after everything. Lena smiled faintly. He never once asked to be noticed. "That's how you know he's real," Ava whispered. At the rear of the plane, the little boy, still wide-eyed, turned to his mother again. "Can I draw him when we land?" His mom smiled. "Of course, honey." "What should I write on the picture?" she thought for a moment. Then said, "The man who flew quietly." The boy beamed. The engines roared again as the plane taxied back to the runway. This time, when it lifted off, every heart on board lifted with it. And within minutes, the escort arrived. 2 F-22 Raptors emerged from the clouds like silent guardians, sleek, proud, majestic. They didn't veer close, didn't show off. They simply flew, in formation, in honor. Inside, phones came out, faces pressed to windows. Even the jaded businessmen in rows 3 and 4 leaned forward like children at a parade. And as the cabin tilted slightly toward D.C., Lena caught a whisper through the comms, only audible to the cockpit crew, and now to the military frequency being relayed to her headset. "Eagle flight holding formation. All clear, Viper 1. Lena's chest tightened. A tear slipped down her cheek, surprising her. She wiped it away quickly. 30,000 feet below, in a quiet neighborhood outside Washington, D.C., an 8-year-old girl sat cross-legged in front of the television. Her grandma stood behind her, knitting, half listening to the news. Military aircraft seen accompanying a commercial flight over Virginia airspace. The reason remains unconfirmed, but some speculate it's connected to a classified operation. On screen, a shot of the plane appeared, followed by the Raptors streaking past. The girl stood suddenly. Her eyes widened. "That's my daddy's plane," she cried. "That's him, I know it." Her grandmother stepped forward, heart pounding. "You sure?" She nodded furiously, eyes glistening with wonder. "He told me if I looked up today, I'd see angels." Back in the sky, Ava stood near the forward galley, looking down the aisle at the patch still visible on Michael's abandoned seat. A single item lay tucked in the seat pocket, a folded note. She reached for it gently. It wasn't addressed to anyone. Just 4 words scribbled in pen. "Honor doesn't need noise." She smiled, folded it again, and tucked it into her own pocket. Outside, the sky deepened to late afternoon gold. The Raptors banked slightly, preparing for descent. Inside the plane, there were no whispers anymore, just reverence. Michael Lane Viper. One was gone from the cabin, but everyone felt him still. And in that shared silence, something rare happened. Not awe, not patriotism, but recognition of what it means to serve without applause, to love without display, and to leave without taking credit. The man in 12F hadn't asked for thanks. He just reminded them what dignity looked like. 30,000 feet in the sky, 2 F-22 Raptors flew in perfect sync with a civilian airliner, their sleek bodies carving invisible arcs across the late afternoon air. Inside the cockpit of the lead Raptor, the pilot's voice came steady over the encrypted comms. Eagle 1 to Viper 1 formation set. Holding on your lead. There was a pause. Then, from the first-class cabin of the commercial jet, a soft, clear voice answered via secure frequency. Copy that, Eagle 1. Stay with me. It was Michael Lane's voice. Viper 1. But he wasn't in a cockpit. He wasn't suited in a flight harness. He wasn't controlling any stick. He was standing at the front of the aircraft just behind the cockpit door headset in place, speaking through the captain's secondary channel, his voice relayed from memory, not command. And yet the tone, the authority, the calm precision in his cadence, it was unmistakable. Every pilot knew the voice of someone who had flown through fire. In the cabin, passengers stared wide-eyed out the windows. The F-22s didn't just fly, they escorted. Not like a parade, not like a show. This was protection. Honor. One flew off the left wing. The other kept a respectful distance off the right. And in the center seat, 12F remained empty. But everyone now looked at it like a sacred space. Ava Monroe stood at the galley door headset in hand. Though she wasn't on the frequency, she could hear echoes from the cockpit speakers. Her heart thudded as she listened to what sounded like poetry, spoken in brevity and code. Hold 17, turn east 2 degrees. Copy, Viper 1. Maintaining altitude. Nice wingspan, Eagle 2. Keep it tight. The Raptors danced in the sky like they were answering his memory. Not protocol. Memory. Back in row 5, the little boy who first saw the patch leaned into the window, his cheek pressed to the glass. Mom, they're really flying with us. His mother nodded, speechless. Logan Carter didn't speak either. He had stopped pretending to look at his tablet 20 minutes ago. Now he stared at the wing and the fighter jet beyond it with haunted awe. A man he'd mocked had become something immortal. Logan shifted, opened the in-flight magazine, and pulled out the small slip of paper inside. A comment card. For once, he wrote slowly, carefully. The man in seat 12F changed how I see the world. I hope your airline never forgets him. He signed only his initials. In the terminal at Washington National, little Amelia Lane pressed her hands to the tall glass wall, eyes scanning the horizon. She'd been there an hour early. Every time the automatic doors opened behind her, she turned with hope. Each time her face fell. But now, a crowd had gathered around one of the lobby TVs. Airport security travelers, even a few flight crew waiting to board. The screen showed a split-image news helicopters capturing aerial footage of the commercial jet, flanked by military fighters. A banner flashed at the bottom F-22's escort civilian plane, Pentagon silent on reason. But Amelia knew the reason. "That's Daddy," she whispered. Her grandmother stepped beside her. "How can you be sure?" "Because he said he was done hiding." On board, the captain gave an update over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, our approach to Washington, D.C. will begin shortly. Airspace has been cleared for our formation. We ask you to remain seated for this historic moment." He paused. "And on behalf of this crew, it's an honor to be the ones flying with him." He didn't say the name. He didn't have to. Lena Hayes clutched her armrest as she watched the jet on her side tilt slightly, catching the sun just right, gleaming like a sword pulled from a sheath. She had flown simulators. She'd trained beside modern legends. But what she felt now wasn't adrenaline. It was reverence. Eagle 1 to Viper 1 airport visual confirmed. Descending in 5. "Copy," Michael's voice replied low and steady. "Keep your wings close. Let them see you. Let them feel it." There was no room for doubt in his tone. No room for ego, either. Only purpose. In the control tower at Reagan, National Air Traffic Controllers stood still at their consoles, watching the escort formation approach. One of them, retired Air Force, whispered under his breath, "Haven't seen a civilian flight escorted like that since—" "Never." The tower supervisor replied, "No one's ever earned it like this." Michael remained calm even as the city skyline came into view. Rooftops, monuments, rivers flowing like veins of memory. It had been years, a lifetime. The city hadn't changed, but he had. In the terminal, Amelia's eyes filled with tears as the shape of the airplane emerged behind the glass, flanked by the Raptors like angels with wings of fire. "He's coming back," she said, her voice cracking. He kept his promise. On board. Ava moved to stand beside Lena, both women transfixed by the dance of jets outside. "They're not just flying with us," Ava said quietly. "They're following him," Lena replied. Ava swallowed. He didn't just disappear all those years ago. He stepped back, so others could fly forward. Michael pressed the mic button on the headset one last time. His voice was steady. Clear. "Eagle Flight, this is Viper 1. Mission complete. Thank you for staying with me." The reply came instantly. "Always, sir." As the Raptors veered gently away, peeling off into perfect formation, ARC's passengers. Inside, the commercial jet leaned toward their windows, hands pressed to the glass, like they could reach through it and touch history. Seat 12 and F remained empty. But now everyone on board understood. He hadn't left it behind. He had given it meaning. As the landing gear lowered and the wheels kissed the tarmac, there was no applause. Only tears. And a silence that meant everything. The aircraft rolled gently to a stop at gate C-27. No one rushed to unbuckle their seatbelt. No one reached for the overhead bin. It wasn't just reverence, it was disbelief. They had landed on time. But something had changed during that descent. They had left behind one kind of world and arrived in another. Inside the terminal, a security team waited, not with weapons or urgency, but with quiet respect. At their side stood an Air Force colonel in full-dress uniform, hands clasped behind his back, waiting as if for royalty. And at the window, barely held back by her grandmother, stood Amelia Lane, her face pressed against the glass, her breath fogging up the window. She saw the forward cabin door open. She saw her father step out. No fanfare. No salute. Just a soft smile. And his hand raised to his heart. Back on board, passengers remained frozen as the jet bridge connected. Then one by one they turned to seat 12F. Lena Hayes stared at the armrest Michael had used, as if it had been burned into history. She reached forward almost unconsciously and ran her fingers over the frayed edge of his seatbelt. "You okay?" Ava asked from beside her. Lena nodded slowly. "Yeah. I just feel like I just read a chapter of history that hasn't been written yet." Ava gave a soft, knowing smile. Maybe we're the ones who are supposed to write it. When the cabin doors opened, passengers exited in silence, some nodding respectfully to the flight attendants, others stopping just long enough to whisper, "Thank you for letting us see that." Logan Carter was the last to leave. Before he stepped into the jet bridge, he turned back to Ava and extended something small, a business card. "Marketing firm," he said gruffly. "Tell that man if he ever wants to tell his story. I'd do it for free." Ava took the card, but said nothing. Some stories weren't meant to be sold. In the staff lounge 15 minutes later, Ava and Lena sat across from each other, with paper cups of lukewarm coffee between them. Lena had her phone out, her fingers flying across the screen. "Still no trace," she said. "No record?" Ava asked. "None," Lena replied, shaking her head. "I searched Air Force archives, Pentagon releases, even leaked Black Ops databases. She flipped the phone toward Ava. The search result page was blank. Viper 1. No matches found. Ava frowned, but Captain Reeves knew him, and General Carr saluted him. They did more than salute him, Lena said. They honored him like he was Moses stepping down from Sinai. Ava took a long sip of her coffee. So, who was he? Lena leaned in. You want to know what I think? Ava nodded. I think he was part of a program so classified it doesn't even exist on paper. A ghost squadron. No insignia, no memorials, just missions. Ava sat back, and he walked onto a commercial flight, like he was just some dad with a backpack. Lena smiled faintly. Maybe that's the only part of his identity he once remembered. Later that evening, Lena drove to her base quarters and opened an old footlocker from her academy days. Inside were stacks of field manuals, operation briefings, and a dusty leather-bound journal. She flipped through the pages until she found what she was looking for. A quote from an unnamed visiting instructor at a leadership seminar 5 years ago. The most dangerous pilots are the ones who disappear after they save you. They don't ask for medals. They don't seek command. They just leave. But make no mistake, they never left the sky. Below the quote, one word was scribbled in faded ink. For her eyes widened. He had been there, even then, whispered about like folklore. Meanwhile, in a small hotel room overlooking the Potomac, Ava sat by the window, fingers resting on the note she had taken from seat 12F. Honor doesn't need noise. She turned it over in her palm. It wasn't just a phrase, it was a code, a principle, a life. She reached for her journal and began to write, not for publication, not for profit, but for memory. Today I met a man who reminded the sky who it belongs to, not with power, not with force, but with quiet. His name was Michael Lane, but the world used to call him Viper 1. And though the world forgot, the sky never did. Outside night fell over Washington, but not all eyes were turned to sleep. In the Pentagon, General Carr sat alone in his office, staring at an encrypted file on a secure terminal. It bore a seal marked Confidential, Deep Ops Ghost Wing. He scrolled past pages of redacted text until he reached a grainy photo. It was old 15 years maybe. A team of pilots, dusty uniforms, sunset behind them. But at the center stood a younger Michael Lane. Same eyes, same posture, same silence. Beneath the image, 2 lines of text. Viper 1 unit status. Disbanded. Commander whereabouts unknown. Carr leaned back, sighed, and whispered to himself, not unknown anymore. Back in the hotel, Michael Lane sat on the edge of the bed towel draped around his neck, a small framed photo in hand. Amelia as a toddler, toothless grin, sunlight in her hair. He smiled softly. A knock sounded at the door. He opened it, and she was there. "Daddy," she cried, flying into his arms. He dropped the photo. It clattered against the table but didn't break. He lifted her, held her tightly, his face buried in her hair. "I saw the planes," she beamed. "On TV, I told everyone it was you." He smiled. "You were right, sweetheart." "Are you famous?" "Now?" she asked. "No," he said. "Just found again." And together, they stood by the window, watching the sky, where the Raptors had flown, where history had been rewritten, without a single headline. The following morning, the sun rose soft and low over Washington, D.C., its golden light slipping through trees, bouncing off marble memorials, and streaming across the tarmac of Reagan National like a quiet salute. Gate C-27 stood empty now. The flight was long gone, but the memory of what happened there lingered like morning mist. At the airline's corporate office downtown, the reception desk phone rang earlier than usual. "Yes," the assistant answered, blinking sleepily. A beat of silence. Then her expression changed. "Sir?" "Yes, we remember the incident." "Yes." Seat 12F. Her voice softened as she listened. Then she stood, nodded, and quietly handed the phone to her supervisor. Line 2. They're asking to nominate a passenger for the Hall of Honor. Meanwhile, in a modest suburban home on the city's edge, Michael Lane stood at the kitchen counter, spreading peanut butter on a slice of bread for his daughter. He wore no uniform, no medals, just a simple t-shirt and jeans. Amelia sat at the table, legs swinging, eyes still glowing with pride. Miss Carter at school said she saw the planes too, she chirped. She said her daddy told her it must be someone important. Michael smiled without turning. Everyone's important, kiddo. Yeah, but you're important in the sky, she giggled. You got your own planes. He turned and handed her the sandwich. I don't need planes anymore. I've got something better. She tilted her head. What's better than F-22s? He tapped her nose gently. You. At the same time, Ava Monroe walked through the airline's headquarters, a small envelope clutched tightly in her hand. Inside was the note she'd found in seat 12F, along with a typed request. She reached the security desk, where a woman in a blazer greeted her. You're here for... Ava held up the envelope. A passenger tribute. It's unofficial. The woman narrowed her eyes, then checked the system. A moment passed. Then she looked up, stunned. Oh, that passenger. She gestured for Ava to follow. Come with me. Back at the base, Lieutenant Lena Hayes stood beside a bulletin board in her unit's break room. Pinned to the center was a newly printed photo taken from a civilian cell phone on Flight 728. It showed the moment Michael Lane stood to salute Captain Marcus Reeves. The angle wasn't perfect. The image was grainy, but his posture was unmistakable. Lena stared at it for a long moment, then slowly pulled off the protective plastic covering and slipped something inside her own unit patch, tucked discreetly into the corner. Her tribute, silent, private, sincere. Elsewhere, Logan Carter sat in his high-rise office downtown overlooking the monuments he once claimed to admire, but rarely visited. A cup of untouched coffee sat beside his laptop. His inbox was flooded with messages, but his focus was fixed on one draft. He read it again, then deleted it. Instead, he opened a new document. The Man in 12F, A Lesson in Respect. He began typing not as a marketing exec, but as a man humbled. His first sentence was simple. He didn't ask to be noticed. That's why we never should have looked away. Back in the airline lounge, Ava approached a narrow bronze plaque mounted on the wall just past the staff security checkpoint. It was modest, easily missed. Airline Hall of Honor, for passengers who reminded us who we are. Beneath it were a few etched names: firefighters, a Tipubite veteran, a nurse who helped deliver a baby mid-flight. Ava handed the envelope to the operations director beside her. No press, she said. No PR campaign. Just this. The director opened the note. Read it. Then looked up slowly. Honor doesn't need noise, he read aloud. She nodded. He never asked for anything. I think that means he deserves everything. Across the city, Michael and Amelia walked hand in hand toward the Jefferson Memorial. It was her favorite place, not because of the history, but because of the ducks that swam in the reflecting pool nearby. She skipped ahead, laughing. Michael followed behind, hands in his pockets, taking in the quiet. And that's when he noticed. People. Not many. Maybe 7 or 8. They were sitting on benches. One was in a wheelchair. Another wore an old Vietnam veteran's cap. And each of them, when they saw Michael, stood. Not all at once. Not choreographed, but naturally. As if something in the air told them, this is him. Michael met each gaze with a nod, a smile, a gentle hand raised in thanks. But he didn't stop. Because respect isn't paused for, it's carried. Later that evening, as the sun dipped behind the Capitol, Michael opened the door to find a small box resting on his porch. There was no label, no name, just a silver pin nestled in black velvet, an aviation wing, simple, polished, but at its center a tiny insignia, a coiled snake, silent alert, and a note. For the ones who made the sky safer without ever being seen. He smiled. He didn't need medals. But this was something else. In the final hour of the day, as the city lights flickered on one by one, Ava stood alone on the quiet tarmac of Reagan National, watching the dark horizon where Michael had once flown. The wind whispered through the chain-link fence. She reached into her coat pocket, unfolded the note one last time. Honor doesn't need noise, but tonight she whispered something new. Still, I hope the world hears it anyway. The house was quiet. Not the sterile kind of quiet that fills an empty space, but the peaceful lived-in kind where silence feels like safety. Michael Lane stood in the entryway of the small suburban home, holding Amelia's backpack, while she danced down the hallway in mismatched socks. The morning sunlight streamed through the kitchen windows, landing gently on the hardwood floor like a benediction. It didn't matter that the furniture was simple, or that the walls were still half bare. This was home. And for the first time in years, Michael let himself breathe all the way in. Amelia rushed back into the room, clutching a small cardboard box in her arms. "Daddy, can I show you something?" Michael smiled, setting the bag down. "Always." She plopped the box on the kitchen table and opened it with a dramatic flourish. Inside were crayon drawings, school certificates, and one slightly bent photo of a small plastic plane. "I saved these for when you came back," she said, "just like you saved the patch." Michael reached in and gently pulled out the picture. The plane was painted silver and blue with her handwriting scribbled across the wing, "Viper Daddy." His voice cracked when he spoke. "You still have this," she nodded proudly. "I kept it in my sock drawer so no one at school would tease me. They said I made you up." Michael chuckled softly, blinking back something warmer than just emotion. "I think they believe you now." Later that afternoon, the front porch became their sanctuary. Amelia sat beside him, coloring in a sketchbook, while he drank coffee from an old ceramic mug that still bore a faded Air Force logo. She leaned against his side, the comfort between them unforced, natural, as if the missing years were simply a breath held too long. "Daddy, yeah, why don't you tell people who you really are?" He paused, watching a pair of birds chase each other through the backyard trees. "Because who I really am isn't someone who needs to be told about." She tilted her head. "But the planes followed you." He smiled. "Sometimes the sky remembers, even when the world doesn't." That evening, a knock came at the door. Michael opened it to find Captain Marcus Reeves standing on the porch in civilian clothes, holding a small gift bag and a sheepish smile. "Didn't mean to interrupt," Marcus said. "Just needed to say something I didn't get to up there." Michael stepped aside, motioning him in. Amelia looked up and beamed. "Hi, jet guy," Marcus laughed. "Hi, little wing commander." They sat in the living room, Marcus setting the gift bag on the coffee table. "I don't know how to say this properly," Marcus began, "but I wouldn't be alive without you. And it's not just me. There are 10 of us. That op in Kandahar, we never forgot." Michael nodded slowly. "I didn't forget either. That's why I disappeared." Marcus frowned. "To protect us." "To protect what mattered," Michael said quietly. "Truth is, you all deserved a life. Medals don't raise daughters. Parades don't fix nightmares." Marcus swallowed hard. Then he opened the bag and handed Michael a small wooden box. Inside, nestled on black felt, was an old flight badge, Michael's own, carefully restored. And beneath it, a letter. Signed by General Carr. "Mr. Lane, we've reviewed your actions, your silence, and your impact. While official records may remain sealed, we are taking unprecedented steps to restore your rank and honor your service privately. On behalf of the command, welcome home, Colonel Viper 1. Michael stared at the letter for a long time, then folded it and handed it back. Keep it, he said. Marcus blinked. Sir Michael's voice was calm. My rank lives in the sky, but my home is here. The next day, Michael walked Amelia to school. Parents whispered on the sidewalk. Some pointed. A few smiled nervously. Michael didn't flinch. He wasn't a ghost anymore. As they reached the gate, Amelia turned and hugged him tightly. "Promise me you won't fly away again," she said. He knelt down and looked her in the eye. "I don't need wings anymore." Then he stood, watched her run into the building, her backpack bouncing behind her, like a parachute opening mid-jump. At the school's office window, a receptionist tapped her coworker. "Is that the guy from the news?" "The one with the jets, I think," so the other whispered. The principal stepped out a moment later, offered a hand. "Mr. Lane, if it's all right, we'd love to invite you to speak on Veterans Day next month." Michael considered it. "I'm not much for speeches. It wouldn't have to be long." Michael smiled. "If I do, I'd only say one thing." "What's that?" He looked past the playground to where Amelia was laughing with friends. "That some battles are worth surviving, just to come home." That evening, the sun began to fall behind the trees as Michael and Amelia laid on the grass behind their home, watching the sky change colors. No jets, no engines, just peace. She curled into his side. He wrapped an arm around her shoulders. And in the quiet, a voice from the past. Reeves's cars, even Ava's, echoed in his mind. "You still fly like you're protecting something." Michael exhaled. I was. And now he had landed for good. A week later, the airport was quiet again. Gate C-27 no longer buzzed with whispers or journalists. The Raptors had long since returned to their base, and the passengers from Flight 728 were scattered across their lives like seeds carried by wind. But something remained. A shift. A story. A name. In the central lobby of the terminal just past security, a modest display case had appeared. It wasn't large. No flashing lights. No banners. Just glass-brushed steel and quiet reverence. Inside, resting on a velvet mount, was a faded canvas backpack. On its corner, stitched in weathered black thread, curled the insignia of a coiled snake, its eyes calm, unblinking. A brass plate beneath it read, "Seat 12F, reserved in memory for those who served without asking and returned without needing to be seen. Viper 1, March 12, 2025. At the dedication ceremony, only a few were invited. The airline had insisted it be private. Among them stood Ava Monroe, dressed not in uniform, but a navy blue dress, her hair pinned back simply. She held a single white rose and placed it in front of the glass with a gentle hand. Next to her was Lena Hayes, in formal service blues, a fresh lieutenant commander's pin glinting on her collar. Her eyes didn't move from the display. Behind them, the little boy from row 5 clutched his drawing, a cartoon raptor soaring through the clouds, a speech bubble from the pilot reading, "Hold formation." He handed it to the curator, who promised it would be placed beside the plaque the next day. And in the back stood Logan Carter, silent, humbled, no-camera crew in sight. He didn't belong there, but something inside him told him it wasn't about belonging, it was about witnessing. Elsewhere in the city, Michael Lane stood in the bleachers of a small community baseball field, his arm wrapped around Amelia's shoulders as they watched local kids run bases and chase foul balls under a spring sun. He wore sunglasses and a soft blue flannel blending into the crowd like any other parent. No one noticed him. And that was exactly how he wanted it. Daddy, Amelia asked, pointing to the scoreboard, Why do they call it a sacrifice fly? He smiled. Because sometimes to help someone get home, you don't need to cross the plate yourself. She wrinkled her nose. That sounds sad. He chuckled. It's not. It just means you did your part. That evening, after tucking, Amelia and Michael stepped out onto the back porch, a cup of coffee in hand. The sky above was clear ink blue with stars breaking through like memories. He looked up. At peace. And somewhere far off, he thought he heard it again. The soft roar of engines. The quiet harmony of raptors cutting the horizon. The last echo of his call sign carried on the wind. Viper 1. Back at Andrews Air Force Base, Captain Marcus Reeves walked into the ready room passing a glass case where a new entry had been added. A leather pilot's glove. Burnished. Repaired. Left behind years ago during a blackout op. Now returned. Below it was a quote no author listed. He never chased medals. He chased the ones who were left behind. In a diner just outside the city, an elderly woman in a wheelchair sat beside a veteran in his 80s. They watched a small screen mounted in the corner as the evening news faded in and out. Mystery Man, known only as Viper 1, has quietly declined all formal ceremonies. Sources close to the story say he requested that his recognition be given instead to an anonymous fund for veteran families. The woman nodded once knowingly. Those are the real ones, she whispered. The ones who vanish with dignity. And somewhere across the country, in a tiny rural school, a teacher read from a letter sent in by a parent. My daughter was on a flight with a man no one noticed until it was too late to thank him. He didn't speak much, but when he did, it made the whole plane quiet. She told me, "Mom, he made me want to be brave without being loud." That's why I'm asking to rename our classroom reading space, the Quiet Corner, in honor of Viper 1. As the months passed, Seat 12F on various airlines began to carry a different energy. Flight attendants would glance at the name lists and smile when they saw it unassigned. Sometimes, they'd place a folded American flag on the cushion. Other times, a child's drawing, a daisy, a note. And passengers, especially veterans, began to notice. They'd ask who sat here, and the answer would always be the same. Someone who never needed to be known, to be unforgettable. Back in his home, Michael kept no medals on the wall, no flight jackets, no plaques. Just one photo, him and Amelia arms around each other, a kite in the sky above them. On the table sat a single unframed patch black snake, worn, and underneath it the handwritten words of a little girl. "Welcome home, Daddy. Love, Amelia." He didn't need anyone to say it aloud, because in the lives he touched the air, he once protected the eyes of those who saw him rise from seat 12F. Viper 1 still flew, not as a ghost, but as a promise. Before you go, I'd love to know where are you watching from tonight. It always amazes us how stories of kindness and courage connect people from all over the world. Share your city or country in the comments below. We truly enjoy hearing your voices and reading your reflections. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel so you'll never miss the next tale of hope, faith, and quiet heroism. Thank you for spending your time with us today. Your presence means more than you know. And as always, may kindness and peace find their way back to you.